Amber,
Hey,
today's the
Martin.
day where the sun is shining, birds are singing.
And
And
I feel like there's a but coming.
this is a but. Are you ready?
I'm not sure.
Well, this is a topic you and I have talked about many times. And I've actually said more than once, we should definitely be recording this
Uh-oh.
as we have this conversation.
So it's one of these heated ones that we've gone back and forth about whether we actually want to podcast it or not.
Oh, for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Sure.
Well, brace yourself, everyone, because
Yeah. Because what I want to talk about is language in project management. And specifically,
okay.
colonial language as it can affect our projects.
Okay.
Because we've had this conversation going back at least 10 years.
Yes.
As we've, I'll call it discarded words from our vernacular.
Yes. And continue to do so.
Yes.
Oh, it's so interesting, just the way you phrase that. It just feels a little bit like a punch into the stomach. And I just think, like, I need that. I want that. I've become more and more desirous of a bit of a gut check in my professional language because I'm going to be real transparent with you. I sucked at this. I've been so shitty about assuming that the big, long words make me sound smart. And also, if I can talk the talk, that means everyone will be convinced I can walk the walk. But you know who's checked me the most? My kids. And my children are adults now. So let me be very clear. My kids were not checking me when they were little ones, mostly because I was in a different career path at that time. But I have to say, my 20-year-olds hear me speak. They'll hear me say something or speak on the phone or something, and I'll hang up or stop. And the moment, now they don't tend to embarrass me in front of anyone, but the moment they have me to themselves, they'll just say, "What did you say that for? Do you know what that word means?" And, my initial response was to say, "Well, do you know how old you are? Do you know how old I am? Do you know how long I've been at this?" Like, that's literally how I felt initially. But they've never been wrong yet. And what I mean by that is they have pointed out to me words that I have not critically thought about. I've just picked them up as my vernacular because I heard other people say it. Or even more so, I heard people who had more position, power, and authority than me use those words. So I assumed that all I had to do was start using those words in order for me to be a part of their club, when in reality, I joined a club I didn't ever really want to be a part of anyway. And it's my young adults in my life that are checking me on that. And I'm so grateful because I didn't know what I didn't know. I'll give you an example, and I do talk about this, but in project management, we talk about stakeholders. And I have just continued to use that term because, it's one of our knowledge areas. We talk about it all the time. And I got checked on that. Because, and the question came as, well, what do you think that term means? And where do you think that term came from? To which I remember my first thought was, I actually have no idea. I just thought it was a professional term to mean people with impact or interest. And the response was, well, that's what it means in that context, but what's its origin? Well, when I did an origin deep dive, I realized that term is so far from what I think even helps support engaging those people. Because the whole point of engaging with those people on a project is not to make them enemies. It's to bring them closer. It's to build connection. It's to build trust. Well, how can we build trust with this very same people that we marginalize by terming stakeholder, which essentially is a term about, driving a stake into the ground to possess something as your own? Its colonialist roots actually come from the gold rush in northern British Columbia. This was not a time where diversity was valued. This was not a time where Indigenous and First Nations that were here thousands of years ago were being respected, were being honored, were being valued even as humans. And that's where the term comes from? I'm sorry, but I can't use that term. I can't. I cannot use the term anymore, and I won't. Now, I tend not to have a big club around me in project management. I haven't got a big group of people that are in agreement with me. And quite honestly, that's fine with me. And I'm not making a judgment for those who decide to use that term. Use it, don't use it. But please, let's have a conversation today, Martin, about words that we have adopted where we actually have not understood the meaning and where it's come from. That's the part that I realize is arrogant and is privileged. And certainly for me as a project manager, when I want to build respect and trust with people, I've got to be far more cautious of the words I'm using. And I've got to get over myself in that defense mechanism, that initial feeling of, what are you talking about? Don't you understand? I know what I had that reaction initially, but it has softened. And for me, there's a lot of words. I'll give you another one. It's a fairly new one on my radar. Execution. Do you know how many times I hear professionals talk about executing something? Now, you and I know in that context, what do they mean? They do not mean unaliving a person. That's not what they mean. They literally mean go do it, go do the work. But that's a very harsh term that's roots are in taking someone's life because they don't deserve to live anymore. Why do we use that term to say it's time to go get the work done? Why? Why is it important to use that kind of aggressive verbiage? I, I don't know. And I'm guilty of it. And I still use that term. And when I do, I hear it differently now. And I realize it's probably not long for this world in my mind. Because every time I say it, I'm reminded that I don't like the sound of it. And I certainly don't mean it to be a violent or aggressive word. However, I think intrinsically in our English language anyway, it feels like that. What about you?
Well, because we've had this conversation going on for a decade or so,
Mm-hmm.
I now have a hyper awareness around words that are in my vernacular that I go, should I go check that one?
Right.
And I had something happen. I haven't even talked to you about this because
Oh.
it happened in the last little while.
Cool.
And the word itself wasn't like stakeholder or execution where there's a harshness
Right.
in its origin. In fact, it's a beautiful word to some degree. But then I really thought about it as problematic.
Mm.
And I was working with a vet friend of mine.
Okay.
And my vet friend had asked me to do something. And I was like, of course, anything for one of the guys who was in the brotherhood.
Oh.
And I thought about brotherhood. And as it left my mouth, I thought, well, that's very gender.
Very gendered. Yes.
And I shook hands. We finished our business. And I immediately went to my HR department and went, hey, is this something I need to be aware of? Because even in its earliest Latin roots, fraternity
right.
is still about gendered connection.
Yep.
And I'm like, I feel like there's something about this word that has been used inside, and for the sake of this, military brotherhood.
Right.
We have expressed that as term of endearment.
Right.
Of love for each other,
well,
stronger than a bunch of strangers who are doing a job.
And, the origin of active military was it was only for men.
Yes.
So you realize that brotherhood is less of a contextual issue if it's only just one gender represented. But of course, the argument now is, well, was it?
Yeah.
That's what it looked like. But was it really? Were there other things at play? Were people masking or hiding? Very possibly.
And it's certainly not the military of today.
No.
It's certainly not the workspace of today. And so while I can appreciate a brotherhood, sisterhood word, I just don't think it has the same use or value in projects or the workplace today that it once held. And so even though the origin wasn't bad, it makes me think, what should we be replacing with?
And I think that's the point. The point here is, if you lots of us right now in the professional world, particularly, I mean, I'm speaking as a Canadian in the North American context, we are often getting called out on some of the words we use. And I think, the challenge, of course, is it does feel a little aggressive sometimes. However, what I'm discovering about it is that it's actually a growth opportunity. If we can make the mindset shift, which was, the world that I was raised in is not the same world that exists today. The context of my upbringing, I'm in my 50s now. What I experienced as what we would call normal is not what some would say normal today, which means that I have the opportunity to have been agile, to iterate, to learn, and to grow in my understanding of what is appropriate or what is inappropriate. The problem is a lot of us as professionals have stopped doing that. I think we feel it tiresome. And I think in my initial moments, I felt threatened. And that was why I would react defensively. What I've discovered is, if I just let go of the threat and I let go of the defense, and instead I just lean in and ask curious questions, what happens is I grow, I change, and my mindset expands. This is the gold. This is the opportunity. I'll give you another example, and actually, you and I have talked about this a few times. It was brought to our attention. We were co-facilitating a full-day workshop almost a year ago now, and it was great, and it was going well. And you, although I probably said it as well, I just know at one point you used the term crazy to describe something in the example you were using that was kind of like out of the ordinary. And you were like, isn't that crazy? I mean, it was just, you just said it. And I remember in the room hearing you say it and thinking to myself, uh-oh, I feel like that's another word we're going to have to give up. Because in the room I think it landed fine, but there was just this little question mark for me if all the people in the room heard that word the same way, which was they didn't notice it. And as you know, turns out, as soon as we finished, one individual came to both of us and mentioned to us that they felt that that was a word that we shouldn't be using, particularly as sort of a throwaway to explain something unusual or outside of the norm. And, I remember you and I think we went for dinner that night after it, and we kind of were spinning with that because neither of us denied they were right in that moment, because we were like, oh, you're right. Because that is a sorted word. It has a lot of history. And yeah, and it's just an unnecessary term to use in that situation. Does it mean that the word shouldn't ever be used? No. But in that situation, to describe something, it's just, there are wiser words to use. Case in point, I am using the term wise and wisdom far more. In fact, I've eradicated the use of best in my speaking. That comes from working with a lot of amazing individuals, First Nations, Indigenous identifying, who speak so much about wisdom in their culture, and wisdom and understanding of how you have wisdom and you can increase in wisdom forever. And when someone like me says best practice, they hear arrogant, won't learn. And I remember thinking, well, do I mean that when I say I'm going to use best practice? Do I mean that I'm not willing to learn, that I think it's the best way forever? And I thought, well, no, I don't mean it, but I use words that end the discussion. I use terminology that shuts down progression and wisdom growth and learning. And so I don't say best practice anymore. In fact, when I hear other people say it, my ears hurt just a little bit, because it's not that I believe they mean that they're not willing to learn. It's that it's like an idiom that we just use and use and use and use and use. And we don't always critically think about, well, do we mean that we will never have anything better than that? That practice will never be better? No. Most of us don't mean that. So I say wise practice. And it it means exactly the same thing. But wise is open-ended. Wise means today I decided that wise practice was to do this. But tomorrow, if that changes, I can still say tomorrow I'm using wise practice because the wisdom has expanded day over day. And those are little subtle shifts that I just feel this makes us better. This makes us more malleable. This makes us more empathetic as opposed to rigid, stubborn, arrogant. And I want to be earnest in my pursuits as a professional, not arrogant.
I love that. So confident and arrogant,
Mm,
two different terms that I love looking at, and we've had many conversations on confident and arrogant.
yes.
I recently heard Rich Diviney give his definition of them.
Okay.
That confidence is internal. I know I can do it.
Mm.
And arrogance is external, and I'm better than you.
Yes,
And
that's right.
I loved that internal, external, and I'm better than.
Mhm.
Because sometimes people are just confident.
Of
I
course.
can do a thing. You can do a thing.
Mhm.
You and I are speakers.
Yeah.
I've never not been confident in speaking.
In your ability to speak.
It's gonna
Right.
happen. And if someone goes like, "Well, isn't that a bit arrogant?" I'm not saying I'm better than your speaking. I'm just really confident in my speaking.
Yeah.
Um, but that arrogance
Mhm.
and I'm better than,
Mhm.
I think when you have words like best,
Mhm.
best is a closing word.
It is. It just sort of goes, "And we're done."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the best
If
it's
this is
ever
the
gonna
best
be.
toothbrush,
Yeah.
shut all projects on toothbrush down.
Yep.
We've
We've
figured it
found
out.
it.
They're
Mhm.
we've hit peak.
Yeah.
There's no up from here. It's done.
Yeah.
And our language is littered with these kinds of
Mhm.
final
Yeah.
spaces.
But don't you also think that a certain amount of that has come from the colonial kind of privilege? This sort of assumption where it's not even questioned that you would have opportunity? You know, I certainly for me, and I will only speak for me, I'm a cisgendered white woman. And with that comes tremendous privilege. Even though I am gendered female from birth, which in some scenarios in North America puts me at a disadvantage. I still, because I am cisgendered and white, have had those privileges. So where, for instance, I was marginalized for being female, and I've experienced massive amount of marginalization for being female in my career. In those pockets, I was never marginalized for being cisgendered or white. I had those privileges, but I didn't have the privilege of being a man. And I think how we carry that, w like, in my own experience, I know I've been arrogant. I know that I have spoken in such a way that has shut others down, that has not created space for me to learn from them, and I have used language, and I have behaved in a way that has very much delivered a blow, a negative impact to others, others that have less privilege than myself, even others that have maybe the equivalent privilege, but because I tend to be quite confident and I am feisty, I just can stand up and overpower, thus devalue others. You know, it breaks my heart that I've done that because a certain amount of that has been unconscious. But it is, I think, because of these privileges that I have had from birth that I haven't thought about. What would it be like to have not had the privilege that I have? And probably the reason, Martin, you and I have talked so much about this as friends and colleagues in the last decade is because it's become ever more relevant to both of our lives in the last decade. That doesn't mean that was callous and unkind on purpose. Before that, I just was unaware. And I feel like it's like scales falling off of my eyes where I was blind and now I see because the arrogance that I carried was unchecked. In fact, it didn't occur to me I needed to check it. It was just something I had. It was like an intrinsic thing that I could wield. And about a decade ago, I became conscious that actually, no, I needed to also still do work to understand that and also care about those that couldn't share my experience because they didn't have the same kind of born and bred privilege that I did. For me, that has also meant that I want to be checked. Feedback is really important. Now, not all feedback that you receive is for you, but all feedback has the potential to help you understand more about you. And I'm grateful for the people who have tapped me on the shoulder, first of all, had the nerve to tap me on the shoulder because I am a very bold, strong, and confident person. So for anyone who has the nerve to come to me and give me feedback, that's always impressive to me. And when they are professional about it and when they are kind, they have transformed me. They have had such a tremendous impact in a positive way. And I have been made better by receiving that feedback and not being defensive. My children are my greatest feedback loop. And mostly too, because I ask them for it. In fact, my oldest is a copy editor by trade. They do a lot of amazing things, but something that they just seem to have been born with the gift of is copy editing. I have them copy edit a lot of my work. And what's amazing about that is they make me so much better. But boy, do they humble me as well, because their filters are different than mine. But they know me and they know my heart and they help me better express my heart in this day and age. Because the words and the behavior that I've carried for a lot of my life, it's just no longer appropriate.
Well, I like the way you came back with the fact that it's not necessarily that we were malice, but it came from and I'll give you the one area that I really notice this the most in my own language, and it comes around mental fitness or mental wellness. I remember taking courses as far back as doing some courses in the 80s on the topic. And the words we use then, I wouldn't say them on this podcast. I just wouldn't.
Good.
But that was common vernacular, not even 40 years ago. And that's just how we referred to these things. And even the journey in the last 20 years of what's okay to talk about we started this with some conversations on crazy.
I know.
DSM-5 doesn't have crazy in it anywhere.
No.
But it has a lot of other disorder.
Yes.
But I would never say about somebody being disordered.
I know.
Because even that.
Well, we're learning that, what role does dis have in our language?
I want to find someone ordered.
I was just going to say, I'm like, even I use the term normal. But, what you can't see, what hearers can't see is I was using air quotes around it because I would argue, well, how do you define normal based on the advances in science and our awareness of just even how humans, how we think, how we create, how we communicate, who we are as unique beings. We're not disordered. We're multi-ordered. You and I are different from one another, and yet we also do have similarities. But to call one or the other of us dis, or to need to diagnose us as a dis in order for us to have better awareness and support, I would argue this is the part that we're going to have to get a little more gentler and kinder around and empathetic.
100%. And even that ability inside a workspace, as you well know, I have an operational stress injury from time in war. I can go to several people in my office and simply it's one of them days. And we have a protocol. We actually established a protocol for this is a stress day.
Yeah.
It doesn't even mean I have to necessarily go home or stop.
No.
It just means this is how I have to face today. Yeah. A conversation impossible 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Much less that we are open and have a protocol for today.
I have a professional who I've worked with in a little bit. They wrote a book called Generous Space. And it was specifically in talking to how to navigate LGBTQIA plus conversations in environments where they're very much questioned and or not welcome. And the notion is, how do we create generous space? And what can that look like? And when you said that, was the first thing I thought of. That's generous space. That's an opportunity to bestow grace upon someone. And instead of hearing their vulnerability and taking that to task, using that vulnerability as an opportunity to go, hey, you know what? Thank you for letting us know. And then the space, honestly, based on that person and the day, the space may be different. But can we be generous with one another? The next time, and I just would encourage listeners, the next time someone comes at you, perhaps even aggressively, to shut you down on the way you said something or the word you used or some way you showed up, before you react, just think in that moment if there's a way for you to create a little bit of generous space. And what does that mean? It means perhaps in that moment, that's not the time for you to defend yourself. It doesn't mean that you're wrong or they're right. It just means in that moment where energy and emotion is high, this may not be the right time to have a conversation about what's right or wrong to say. That time needs to come when cooler heads are prevailing and when there's more generous space that's being created, because not every one of us is ready to have that tough conversation at every moment. And if we force those conversations when others are not prepared or equipped, we can create a lot more harm than necessary. And I think this is the key. It's not about right and wrong. It's about timing, acceptance, and recognizing that humans are, we're always going to fail. That I feel like that's the only thing I know for sure about me is I'm going to make mistakes. But it's what do I do with them? And how do I show up in those moments? The first person who ever called me out on using the term stakeholder, I recall in the moment wanting to explain to them how much I understood that they were wrong. And instead, I was so shocked. I was quiet. I saw their frustration, their hurt. And all that I had the ability to utter was, I'm sorry. And I can't even tell you what I was saying I'm sorry for, because at the time I was so struck by the moment and their emotion towards it. But I just said, I'm sorry. And then as I could see them calming down, because I wasn't going to explain how they were wrong and I was right, I found them then wanting to offer me more context. And instead of me saying, well, let me tell you, I just said, well, share with me. What is your context? And it was in just that subtle shift in my behavior that I realized, oh, this is an opportunity for me to learn and not be seen as an arrogant, privileged, cisgendered white woman who somehow thinks that that term is right. Because I don't know. My wisdom in that moment told me it was, but my wisdom has shifted.
Well, I want to say thank you. And I want to say thank you for not commanding us all to go and create generous spaces. Go now and create generous space. This is not a command.
No.
It's not a direction.
It's just an opportunity.
The invitation is there. The invitation is there because there are so many things we've had in the past that need a generous space.
Mm-hmm.
And be open to where in our lives a generous space can be created.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the vulnerability today.
Yeah, thank you, Martin.
And I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too.